For many decades, the home of Rob Reiner and Michelle had been admired by the public as a model of a close-knit and enduring Hollywood family. For children gathered under one roof in Brentwood. Loving family get-togethers and a life that seemed so peaceful nothing could possibly disturb it. Yet, the night of December 14th struck without warning like an icy blade. Right inside that very house, a horrific tragedy occurred, taking the lives of Rob and Michelle forever. When the police launched their investigation and their son Nick was arrested as a suspect, many believed that this heartbreaking story would soon come to an end. But that silence lasted only for a brief moment. Not long afterward, Tracy Reiner, the adopted daughter whom Rob loved as if she were his own flesh and blood, shattered that calm with revelations that sent shock waves through public opinion. She spoke of an unfinished will, of things her father had not yet had the chance to say, of an apology that came too late, and of pain carefully concealed behind the family's seemingly tranquil exterior. If Dad had lived just one more day, Tracy said tearfully, perhaps everything wouldn't have been pushed this far. Before public sentiment had time to settle, Romy, the biological daughter of Rob and Michelle, spoke up with a different perspective, as if pouring more oil onto the fire of suspicion. According to her, it was very possible that the root of all the family's tragedy stemmed from Rob's unequal treatment of his children. Rob Reiner was not only famous for his talent as a director, but was also known as a father who always placed his family above all else. Despite a packed schedule filled with iconic films, he still made nurturing, accompanying, and caring for his 4 children a top priority. Tracy, the daughter he adopted from his first marriage, along with Jake, Nick, and Romy, the 3 children he shared with his second wife, Michelle Singer Reiner. The love he gave his children was expressed not merely through words of guidance or everyday concern, but as a quiet yet steadfast current that flowed through every moment of life from their early childhood into adulthood. "You children are my whole world," he once said to Tracy in a trembling but deeply sincere voice. "I will always be by your side no matter what happens." With Tracy in particular, his adopted daughter Rob gave her his complete love and respect. He always regarded her as his own child, readily listening, protecting her, and sharing simple yet meaningful everyday moments together. On peaceful evenings, Rob would often sit beside Tracy, talking with her about work and life, emphasizing that no matter how difficult the road ahead might be, she would always have a solid support behind her. "I know you're strong enough to take care of yourself, but I'll always be here when you need me," he once told her, allowing Tracy to clearly feel the sense of safety and love surrounding her. Jake, the eldest son, was accompanied by Rob through shared interests, especially their passion for baseball, a spiritual gift passed down from grandfather Carl Reiner. From Carl to Rob and from Rob to Jake, that love was handed on with great tenderness. Father and son traveled together to most of the Major League Baseball stadiums across the United States, sharing unforgettable, deeply moving moments. Rob once shared that those trips were not simply about watching baseball, but a way for him to bond more deeply with his son, conveying love and family values through each game. Those journeys gradually became treasured memories where the bond between father and son was expressed through simple yet profoundly meaningful gestures. Rob would often smile and say to Jake, "You know, sometimes I even learn a lot from you." It was precisely those moments that created a lasting connection that could hardly ever fade. Most special of all was Romy, the youngest daughter, who always received attentive care and heartfelt listening from both her father and mother. Rob devoted a great deal of time to listening to his daughter's worries, dreams, and even her disappointments, ensuring that Romy always felt loved and protected. "I'll always be here, Romy. No matter where you go or whatever you do," he once said with tearful eyes, "I will never leave you." Those words along with his warm embraces became a strong emotional anchor that stayed with her throughout her youth. However, with Nick in particular, that relationship took on an entirely opposite tone, one filled with tension, instability, and deep-seated pain. Rob Reiner loved his son with a form of affection that was both patient and desperate, like a father perpetually suspended between fragile hope and constant fear. He watched Nick grow up not through the smooth, steady steps taken by his other children, but through a series of downward slides and repeated stumbles that never allowed a father's heart to rest in peace. From early childhood, a distance difficult to put into words existed between Rob and Nick. The two rarely shared common interests, nor could they easily find the sense of harmony Rob had experienced with his other children. Rob was anchored in familiar values and structure. While Nick revealed an early tendency toward rebellion and emotional instability, there were late nights in the Brentwood house when Rob would sit silently waiting for his son to return. His eyes fixed on the slowly turning hands of the clock, questioning himself over and over, wondering where he might have gone wrong as a father. When Nick had just turned 15, drugs began to infiltrate his life, starting with heroin and cocaine and quickly spiraling into a severe and prolonged addiction. Rob and Michelle were forced to watch their son cycle in and out of rehabilitation centers more than a dozen times, endure periods of homelessness while drifting across multiple states and survive countless moments when death seemed perilously close. Each such ordeal crushed the father's heart anew, suffocating him with fear and a wordless sense of helplessness. In his efforts to pull his son back from the edge of the abyss, Rob once chose what he believed was tough love. Following the advice of professionals, he forced Nick into rehabilitation against his will and even cut off financial support so that his son would be compelled to face the consequences of his actions. Later, Rob himself admitted that this had been the greatest mistake of his life. "We trusted people with degrees hanging all over their walls more than we were willing to truly listen to our own son. They told us Nick was manipulating us and we believed them." Embedded in that confession was the profound remorse of a father who had unknowingly pushed his child further into despair. As a result, the father-son relationship grew increasingly distant, laden with conflict and emotional wounds. There were years when Nick chose life on the streets over returning home. While Rob and Michelle lived in constant anxiety, unsure whether their son was even still alive on any given day, explosive arguments, prolonged silences, and unshared pain gradually widened the gap between them, making reconciliation feel ever more elusive. The release of the film Being Charlie in 2015 appeared like a faint glimmer of light in the darkness. Rob served as the director while Nick co-wrote the screenplay, a story heavily imbued with semi-autobiographical elements drawn from Nick's own life. The filmmaking process forced father and son to confront each other directly, engaging in heated debates, but for the first time truly listening. Rob later shared, "There were moments of extreme tension when we were yelling at each other, but it helped me understand more deeply what Nick had gone through." Nick also acknowledged that working on the film with his father had changed many things, partially mending their fractured relationship. Even so, that tension never fully disappeared. Although Nick experienced periods of successful sobriety and lived for a time in the guest house on his parents' property, ongoing mental health struggles and the persistent risk of relapse continued to smolder beneath the surface. Michelle confided to friends that they had tried everything possible, but were gradually becoming exhausted, both mentally and physically. Just one day before the tragedy unfolded at Conan O'Brien's Christmas party on the evening of December 13, 2025, what should have been a warm and festive atmosphere suddenly cracked. Amid the sparkling lights and cheerful laughter, Rob Reiner arrived with Nick. Yet, the tension between father and son was nearly impossible to conceal. In front of numerous guests, Rob raised his voice, scolding his son for behaviors he deemed unacceptable, his tone heavy with anger and disappointment. The room fell abruptly silent as if everyone present sensed that something deeply unsettling was taking place. Nick reacted fiercely, his eyes bloodshot, his words fragmented, carrying with them years of accumulated hurt and resentment. This was no longer an ordinary family argument, but an eruption of long-suppressed anguish, the culmination of a father-son relationship, perpetually wavering between love and pain. In that moment, Rob uttered a single weighty sentence. "I can't keep protecting you if you continue to live like this," before turning his back and walking away, leaving Nick standing frozen in the middle of the party. Many later recalled that moment as a dark omen. Perhaps it was precisely then that the final straw was laid, when every attempt at reconciliation, every act of forgiveness, and the last remaining hopes all collapsed. Christmas night should have been a time of togetherness. But for Rob and Nick, it ended in oppressive silence and exchanged glances that no longer met. On December 14, 2025, the tragedy officially struck. Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle were found dead in their Brentwood home in a shocking homicide. Hollywood was left reeling, unable to believe that a family once regarded as close-knit could meet such a heartbreaking end. According to preliminary investigation results, Nick Reiner was quickly identified as the primary suspect amid reports suggesting that he was in an unstable state due to addiction and long-suppressed rage. Police stated that during a loss of control, Nick rushed into the kitchen and grabbed an ordinary household kitchen knife, the large knife Michelle regularly used to cut vegetables and meat. With that sharp blade, he attacked his mother first, inflicting severe injuries that caused Michelle to die rapidly from blood loss. Hearing the commotion, Rob Reiner ran in to intervene and protect his wife. But he too was attacked by Nick, sustaining fatal stab wounds to the neck and chest. The entire incident unfolded in a brief explosive moment filled with chaos and despair, transforming a once warm home into a horrific crime scene. Romy Reiner, the youngest daughter, discovered her parents' bodies upon returning home around 3:30 p.m. and immediately called the police. Nick fled the scene shortly thereafter, but was apprehended just hours later by the lab near the University of Southern California. He is currently being held without bail on charges of double murder. While the case remains under detailed investigation, forensic sources have confirmed that the wounds are fully consistent with the ordinary kitchen knife recovered at the scene. This is considered the most devastating tragedy imaginable, bringing to a close the arduous journey of a family that had once struggled relentlessly to escape the shadows of addiction. When Nick was arrested, the atmosphere of mourning grew even more suffocating. The public mourned not only the deaths of Rob and Michelle, but also shuddered at the possibility that the tragedy had stemmed from family wounds that never had the chance to heal. If the allegations are confirmed, it will stand as the most painful possible ending to a father-son relationship once nurtured by both love and hope. And then, as the Christmas lights gradually faded, all that remained was a shattered family, a broken father-son bond, and countless questions that would never find answers. Yet, more painful than all of that loss was the moment when the adopted daughter, Tracy Reiner, finally spoke up. Her words made the entire world fall silent because it turned out that the truth behind everything was nothing like what people had long believed. After the passing of Rob Reiner and Michelle Singer Reiner, while Hollywood was still engulfed in shock and mourning, Tracy Reiner was the first to break her silence. Her voice trembled and faltered as if every word she uttered tore away another fragment of memory. Tracy said that the pain had arrived too suddenly, too swiftly, leaving no one with time to prepare themselves. Just days before the tragedy, she had still seen her father, still witnessed Rob present in flesh and blood. Still heard him laugh and talk about the most ordinary things in life. There had been no warning signs whatsoever of such a horrific ending. "I had just seen my dad last week," Tracy said through sobs. And it was precisely that sentence that made the truth feel more merciless than ever. In a brief exchange with NBC News, Tracy could not hide the overwhelming shock she was enduring. "I come from the most wonderful family," she said, her voice completely breaking. "I don't even know what to say. I'm still in shock." These were not words meant to draw attention, but the instinctive reaction of a daughter who had been abruptly torn away from the familiar safe world she had believed would last forever. Tracy shared that Rob and Michelle were the best parents any child could ever dream of having. Rob, despite being consumed by films that would later become classics, always placed his family at the very top of his priorities. He taught his children about honesty, about how to love others, and about standing back up after every fall. Michelle, with the gentle heart of a photographer and producer, was always the quiet listener, the warm pillar of support for every member of the family. Together, they built a home filled with laughter, even though at times they still had to confront harsh and unavoidable trials. What pained Tracy the most during the interview was speaking about Nick. She said that her parents truly loved Nick, perhaps even loved him with more worry and anguish than anyone else. Rob and Michelle always saw Nick as the most vulnerable of their children, the one who needed the most protection, the most patience, and the greatest compassion. "They always told me how much they loved Nick." Tracy recalled how worried they were about him. Even when everything became incredibly difficult, Rob and Michelle spoke of Nick with eyes filled with both sorrow and hope. They understood that their son had endured more hardship than his siblings understood, that addiction had stolen Nick's youth and peace of mind. For that very reason, in their will, they left Nick a larger share of their assets as a quiet form of compensation, as a final message that said, "You are still our beloved son, no matter what has happened." One evening, Tracy entered Rob's study alone, the room he cherished the most. On the old wooden desk, amid unfinished scripts and pencils worn down by time, she noticed a brown notebook with no name on its cover. It had been there for a long time, as if waiting for the right moment to be opened. Tracy hesitated for a few seconds, her heart pounding, then slowly turned the first page, and instantly understood that she had touched the deepest, most private part of her father's soul. The words inside were not work notes, but fragmented confessions filled with torment. Rob wrote about Nick, his handwriting more unsteady than usual. He admitted his regret for having stood too far away during the months of Nick's rehabilitation, believing that toughness would make his son stronger. "Perhaps I was wrong," he wrote. Perhaps what he needed was not discipline, but someone sitting beside him, even if only in silence. Tracy read those lines with icy hands, her tears falling and soaking into the pages. In the pages that followed, Rob wrote about the helplessness of a father watching his child spiral downward without being able to pull him back. "There is no pain like watching your own child suffer and being unable to take that pain in their place," he wrote. "If only I could carry it for him, even for just one day." These words were not polished or ornate, but raw and honest, like wounds that had never truly healed. There was one passage that Tracy could not continue reading right away. Rob confessed that he was afraid that Nick might believe he had been abandoned. "If you think your father doesn't love you, then that is my fault," he wrote. "I love you so much that I don't even know how to love you the right way." Tracy collapsed into the chair, clutching the notebook tightly to her chest, finally realizing that her father's silence had never been coldness, but a fear buried deep within his heart. Amid all those pages drenched in regret, a fragile glimmer of hope still remained. Rob wrote that he always dreamed of a day when Nick could live a normal life. Not a brilliant or widely successful one, but simply a life calm enough to breathe in peace. "If you can wake up each morning without hating yourself," he wrote, "that alone would be enough for me." Reading those lines, Tracy broke down, sobbing because it was something her father had never once said out loud in front of Nick. She recalled the times Nick accused their parents of not understanding him, of abandoning him when he needed them most. Tracy had argued back, had grown angry at those words, but now holding the notebook in her hands, she could see only a far quieter and deeper tragedy. Two generations loving each other with everything they had, yet unable to find a shared language to truly reach one another. "I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed me," Rob wrote on the final pages, like a belated confession that would never be heard. Tracy closed the notebook very slowly, as if afraid that even the slightest movement might further wound the words inside. In the empty room, she whispered softly, "Dad loved Nick so much. They just didn't know how to say it to each other." The sentence dissolved into the silence unanswered, yet it felt as though the old wooden walls themselves were quietly listening. According to Tracy, the greatest tragedy did not lie in how much her parents had given, but in the fact that Nick had never truly understood it. "They loved Nick so much," she said, her voice choking to the point that she had to pause. "But maybe Nick never felt that love in the way they hoped he would." It was not an accusation, nor a belated judgment, but a gentle sorrow, as if every chance to make things right had quietly slipped away. Tracy explained that for many years Nick had frequently blamed their parents, blaming them for not understanding him, for not being present long enough, for not loving him in the way he needed. Those accusations, sometimes erupting in anger, sometimes smoldering like an old wound, gradually accumulated into a distance that could not be named. The parents loved their son in their own way, while Nick waited for something else. A fuller presence, a hug, a sentence that neither side managed to give in time. She vividly remembered the moments when Rob and Michelle chose silence after arguments, as if any explanation at that point felt powerless. They never stopped loving Nick, but that love was always accompanied by confusion and the fear that saying too much would only push him further away. "They were in so much pain," Tracy said very softly. "But they never stopped hoping that one day Nick would understand." Finally, Tracy emphasized that in her eyes, Rob and Michelle were not only parents, but also human beings who were always trying to do the right thing, even when it meant paying for it with pain. "My dad wasn't perfect," she said softly. "But he loved his children with everything he had." And it was precisely that truth that made their passing more unbearable than ever. At the same time that Tracy spoke out, the closest members of the Reiner family also released an official statement represented by the youngest daughter, Rob Reiner, the person who had directly confronted the most heartbreaking moment of her life. In a brief message sent to Variety, the words read like a heavy sigh amid a storm of loss. "We are deeply devastated by this sudden loss and ask for privacy during this incredibly difficult time." Just a few short lines, yet they carried an immeasurable weight of grief from children who had lost both parents in a single fateful day. Romy Reiner, 28 years old, a talented young woman pursuing a career in acting and screenwriting, was the one who went to her parents' house that afternoon. Living nearby, she often stopped by to share ordinary moments with Rob and Michelle, the two people she had always proudly called the greatest inspirations of her life. No one could have imagined that what seemed like an ordinary visit would turn into a horrific nightmare. When Romy opened the door and stepped into the familiar Brentwood home, she was immediately confronted with a scene no child should ever have to witness. Her parents lying motionless, bearing severe knife wounds. She was so shocked that she could not utter a single word, her body trembling. Her mind emptied as if pulled into an endless void. According to sources close to the family, Romy sat silently crying in a corner of the house, tears falling without sound, as though any noise might shatter her already broken heart even further. That moment left a profound psychological trauma for Romy. She could not believe that just hours earlier, her parents had still been there. Rob with his familiar warm smile, Michelle with her gentle, comforting embrace. Now all that remained was a vast emptiness, and the horrifying memory clung to her every second, every minute. Mental health experts note that a shock of this magnitude can lead to post-traumatic stress disorder with symptoms such as recurring nightmares, irrational guilt, or a sense of detachment from the world around them. No matter how strong she may be, Romy is in the end still a young woman facing the greatest pain of her life. The family quickly gathered together Jake, Tracy, and their closest loved ones to support Romy through this dark period. Yet everyone understands that such a wound will require a very long time to heal, if it can ever fully heal at